r/AskReddit. Divorced people looking back to when you got married, were there signs that your marriage wouldn't last? Yes, there was a multitude of signs we were wrong for each other. The main one was that I was afraid of him. He had a short temper and was extremely controlling and possessive. On top of that, he constantly flirted with a coworker, but denied he felt anything more than friendship. They recently married. I realized how similar our relationship was to that of my parents and grandparents. My dad is also very short-tempered and selfish, and had a habit of belittling my mom for almost everything, and I honestly don't know if my grandparents ever loved each other, yet both couples stayed married without fixing the problems. I grew up promising myself I would never be in a relationship like either of those, and I realized that's exactly what I was doing. I was completely miserable and suicidal, and knew if I didn't end it, I would either be miserable the rest of my life, or I'd kill myself because of it. By the way, we tried working on it several times, and I tried breaking up with him several times before we were married and even engaged, but when he promised to change it only ever lasted a couple weeks, and when I tried to leave him, he literally would not let me. The night I left, he blocked the door and pulled my suitcase out of my hands, shouting at me that I couldn't go. A week after I moved out, I went to the house while he was at work and left him a long letter detailing all the reasons why it could never work between us. I placed my rings on it, got my cat and walked out. I knew if I did it in person or even on the phone, he wouldn't accept it. Best decision of my life. I'm now happily living in another state with an amazing boyfriend who treats me with respect and showers me with affection just because I'm me. Life is so much better than it ever could have been with him. I was 6 years into a relationship/marriage with a bipolar and schizophrenic man I thought I could fix with my love. One Sunday afternoon, I drive us to Target. We are walking past the hardware section, and for some reason he snaps. He then spends the next half hour following me around the store, telling me I'm a terrible, disgusting woman, a selfish bitch, a conceited cunt, that I'm not as smart as I think I am, that I'm ugly and need to take better care of myself. I make him sick. I finally have enough of trying to get my shopping done while ignoring him, so I go up to the registers and try to check out. The lines are long. He starts telling me that he's going to punch me in the face. That he would love it if I took the first swing, because then he could beat my ass. I'm horrified. People around me are staring. I'm that girl. It was then that I had a sudden moment of clarity. I will never fix this man. I will never be able to really help him. I'm only losing myself, and I'm now just putting myself in physical danger. This marriage is not long for this world. A few days later, he texted me at work telling me that I was a piece of shit and that he was moving out. He wanted me to beg him to stay, as I had many times before. This time, I didn't. That was 2 years ago. He had gone off the reservation, being committed, was unreachable for most of that time, and our divorce was finally finalized last week. Edit. Because so many people have berated me for it here and in PM, I'd just like to clarify what I meant by fixing crazy with my love. It's self-deprecating hyperbole. I knew that I couldn't literally fix bipolar disorder and schizophrenia with love. I thought that my love and support would be enough to help keep him together, that I could help him treat his mental illness and get it under control. I naively thought that having a supportive wife who drugged him to psychiatrist appointments would make things better. He actually wasn't diagnosed with anything when we started living together, and schizophrenia commonly comes on like a freight train in the mid-20s. I thought, I made a vow to this man, and we'll get through this together. I didn't know how bad it would be. This will probably get buried, but I'll take a swing at this one. I was married for 11 years. We got married when we were young, 21 and 22. We'd been dating for 2.5 years before I proposed, and we got married about 8 months later. For a question like this, it's kind of necessary to work backwards. Why did we get divorced? Well, as is the style with the kids these days, one of the things we attempted was to open up our marriage. I've been told over and over and over again that this wasn't the reason she wanted to get a divorce, and I actually think I believe it. Context is pretty important, and there's no way I can really get enough of it across in a Reddit post for you to come to the same conclusion. So you might have to trust me on that. It was, however, a symptom. In my opinion, we got divorced because my ex-wife internalized way too many of her own feelings. I'm not suggesting that she was a terrible person for that, but it left me without a really visible horizon. I think, as in most serious relationships, my biggest desire was for us to both be happy and happy with each other, but because her preferences or opinions on many subjects were so hard to drag into the light, I ended up making most decisions on my own. I remember trying very hard to get her opinion on a number of things, anything from the popular "where do you want to eat" all the way through what kind of car we should buy, should we put our IRA savings in X versus Y, or even should we have children. I'm not saying she was silent either. We talked about a lot of things and she would point things out, but rarely say this is what I want to, or don't want to, do. The end came around the time a few of her college roommates started families. I was never going to have that drive to be a father, certainly not enough that it should have, in my mind, overcome relative ambivalence on the part of the other partner. She then began to reevaluate her life sharply, and I'd say realize that she'd effectively been super quiet for over a decade, and decide that she couldn't change that unless she was nowhere near me. We went from "I love you so much we will always be together" to "I just don't love you anymore, and I'm not even sure when I stopped in under 3 months." So, back to the wedding, the engagement, the dating. Yes, it was always like this. It's not as if she just fell silent one day. That's just how the relationship started, and that's how it ended. And it wasn't sustainable. The worst bit is, because I was effectively making all the decisions, and she was effectively pretending to be happy, I was happy. It's been almost exactly a year to the day, and I still have tears in my, onions on my desk. That she also had serious resentment for her father, primarily for how he interacted with her growing up, and her mother. I thought to myself on more than one occasion that, whenever I did anything that vaguely reminded her of him, that it was as if a nuclear bomb had gone off. That, believe it or not, was probably the far less influential cause of our split. You know what? It wouldn't matter. Okay, there were signs that I was in love, and I wouldn't have listened, even if it was my parents pulling me aside, throwing a bag over my head, and smuggling me across the border. I would have found a way to get back to her one way or another. In fact, the whole telling me what I shouldn't do would have probably just reinforced my resolve. The thing is, I wouldn't have changed a thing. Yes, I was absolutely miserable. Yes, I became antisocial and gained a shitload of weight and lost interest in sex. Yes, I lost all my friends, some of my family, and most of my sanity, but that's just the depths we end up sinking to when we are not happy. I'm not some hippie granular sensitive ponytail motivational speaker, but I'll tell you this one thing I learned from it. I learned that I wasn't wrong to feel unconditional love for someone, but they had to be not only worthy of receiving it, but capable and willing to give it back in return. I learned that my daughter is the one ongoing success that I can take from that relationship. I learned that it was better for me to be happy out of a relationship with her mother than miserable with her. She's 8 now, and she even says so. She doesn't care for her mother's boyfriends, but she often says that she wants me to get married and give her a little brother or sister. I'm still optimistic. No one thing destroyed our relationship. It was a mutual deconstruction of dreams and ambitions. Sure, money, life, immaturity all contributed to the downfall, but I can't point my finger at one thing or one event that hastened the demise of our love. It just happened slowly and gradually, fight after fight, argument after argument, until the phrase, "if you don't like it, get your shit and get out" became less of a threat and more of a reasonable solution. I take mutual blame for the end of it all, even though I fought it. This is the one argument I'm willing to concede. She was right, and we were wrong. I say this because even though I haven't found the right woman, I've learned that I'm still worthy of her, wherever she is. I'm a good guy, a great dad, a smart person, very ambitious and empathetic, and I'll make someone a good husband, because I already know how to be a bad one. The good news is that my now ex-wife has also learned from our failed relationship, and she seems happy now with her new boyfriend. They are talking about getting married, and I hope they do. I wish the best for her, because we were both lessons in how to become better spouses, better parents, and better people all around. When we first met, there was a bunch of shit hidden under her bed, junk she didn't have a place to put, and just shoved underneath to make her place seem neat. After a few years of being together and then married, I realized she was a borderline hoarder, keeping shit because it had some potential value and couldn't bear to throw it out. Eventually my 2.5 car garage turned into her storage room, and our large walk-in closet was completely filled with stuff she threw in there when guests came over, and it could no longer be used for practical things like, oh, what you wanted to wear for the day, because the closet could not be navigated. There are many other parts of our house that became useless for its intended use: jacuzzi, storage rooms, cupboards, etc. Okay, that's ranting. I tried to clean up a few times, but she simply didn't care. She had self-esteem issues and her only validation was through the kids, buying fancy and expensive outfits, making sure they were top in their class, and involved in activities, etc. Meanwhile I was just a 6-figure paycheck, driving a 15-year-old car. Because of the debt, our finances were a mess, as you might be able to project. Oh, and she was a stay-at-home mom/wife. So my advice is to look for the oddball behavior that at a younger age may seem like a foible, but it really could just be the tip of the iceberg. There are many options out there. Do not settle. It's your one life. Make the right decision. And if you don't, get out as soon as possible and try again. And whatever you do, don't think that kids will make it better. They only make a bad marriage much worse. I'm happily divorced and know a lot more about the signals to look for in a potential mate and what to avoid. Gear with your gut about anything negative and bail early while you have the chance. That's a lot of preaching. I hope it helps somebody. I've known my wife since I was 17 years old, turned 30 a few weeks ago. Going into the marriage, I knew that we would be together forever. I had always encouraged honesty and open communication in our relationship and stood on those principles. I can remember honest discussions between the two of us about how we weren't going to ever leave each other and would always support and work toward our marriage. I thought we had a very solid support structure and knew I would love her the rest of my life. We fought occasionally, but we are both headstrong. The first week of December in 11 she told me she wasn't happy. The second week she told me she didn't love me anymore. The first week of January she wanted to separate, and at this point we are moving toward a divorce, unless she changes her mind. I've been hoping she'll change her mind for 4 months, for all the good it's done me. There were no signs that my marriage wouldn't last. She was telling me she loved me and how amazing I was a few days before she told me she was unhappy and might not love me. I still don't honestly understand what happened between the two of us, but I know that I haven't changed. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe what she wanted changed. I have no idea. Ultimately, what I'm getting at is that I knew my marriage would last forever from the moment I met her until the last time I begged her to stay and she said no. Here's a happy divorce story. I got married at 21. We didn't want a church wedding, but she wanted her childhood minister to officiate, so we had to have 2 counseling sessions with the guy. One of the things he had us do was fill out a survey rating how important certain things are to us, and it was supposed to show how compatible our values were. He then discussed the differences with us and asked if we were concerned about them. The differences were nothing major, and I actually can't remember them. It was all very vague. We didn't take it seriously at all. 10 years went by, and we hardly ever fought. We were the token happy marriage among our friends. but in that last year we suddenly stopped wanting to be around each other, stopped talking, and stopped having sex. I'm still not entirely sure what happened. It was my idea to split up. We did it on very friendly terms. As she was moving out we found the notes her minister had given us. While our differences in values were still pretty minor, everything he'd written made more sense than it had 10 years ago. We got sad about it for a few minutes, then had divorce sex on the floor, and I regret nothing. A lot of the top responses are specific moments or horror stories which are funny and all, but I'm gonna try and go to the root of all of those fights and blow-ups. Basically it's all in how you disagree. There's no such thing as two people perfect for each other, and how you approach the friction is what either strengthens or eats away at a relationship. This isn't about being nice or not yelling. Some people are very happy with each other, but during tough moments kinda blow up. Believe it or not, that's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. Just as people who speak calmly and quietly are not always happy. What's poisonous is contempt and resentment. When you disagree, do you discuss the issue or the person? Is it, I want sushi, but you want pizza, or is it, you always want sushi, I never get pizza? Subtle difference, but those little things are so much more important than most people realize. The latter phrase shows the person is the problem, uses absolute always/never language which pushes the other away, shows that someone is keeping score, and thus not letting go of negative feelings, resentment, and a sense of blaming the partner for causing the pain and disregard for the partner's desires, contempt. Once the problem is your partner, rather than the situation/issue/disagreement/etc, then you're on the road to unhappiness, no matter how you slice it. In my case this is all knowledge gained in hindsight. It took my divorce for me to see this, and see that I was contributing just as much bullshit as she was, and that nobody is really to blame. You can only change yourself, and I look forward to not making the same mistakes next time around, and finding a partner mature enough to match my newfound emotional wisdom. Edit. Holy crap, didn't expect such a response. Glad so many of you find this useful. Thanks all. Hindsight is always 20/20. Looking back, there were definitely some red flags, but I was too young and naive to realize it. I married what I would call a trophy MILF. She had a kid and was divorced once already. No problem. I'll rescue this one. Stupid. We fought about little things, like how to fold bath towels, or directions to a friend's house. Vacations became nightmares. Our communication with each other was terrible. Like an ape trying to negotiate a real estate transaction with a golden retriever. Rational discussions were not to be had. I later found out she suffered from a borderline personality disorder and had abandonment issues. I could go on for hours. It wasn't all on her either. I had my moments too. After 10 years, I was faced with a decision. Eat the business end of a shotgun, or move on with my life. I've been divorced for 3 years, and I'm about to remarry come October. The woman I'm with now is the polar opposite of my ex. We communicate on a level that I never thought I could have with someone. If a problem arises, we discuss it like adults, and negate any chances of resentment. We respect each other equally, and work amazingly well together. I couldn't be happier. My advice to would-be domestic partnerships: don't marry someone you wouldn't want raising your future prodigy. Don't marry someone you can't sit down and have an open rational conversation with. Don't marry for looks, status, or other superficial reasons. Don't try to fix anyone. You're just putting chrome on a turd. Do marry someone you respect, love and admire, and who feels those same things about you. When red flags come up, either move on, or talk with the person about them. They don't just fade away. Resentment is the enemy of every marriage. A few. She was a very enthusiastic Christian, and I'm not religious. When we dated, she would listen intently to my critiques of organized religion, and insist that she had an open mind, but that all changed after we got married. She would break things and hit me quite a lot. I never thought about female on male domestic violence much, until it was a regular part of my life. about once per month. While we were married, she would get very angry during relatively mild arguments and break things. For instance, slam a door until it came off its hinges, take all of the Pyrex outside and smash it on the driveway. When she calmed down, she never gave an apology and usually insisted that I take part of the blame for how things went down. About once every 6 months, she would hit me hard enough to leave bad bruises. The last straw was when she hit me with the steel rod on the back of a caulking gun, putting me in the hospital with broken ribs and concussion. She would follow me to work. I never thought about this one until recently, but there were multiple occasions on which I caught her driving by my bus transfer station while I was on my way to work, miles away from her house and in the opposite direction of her workplace. On the times I would see her drive by, she would stop and tell me that she forgot to ask me something. I had a cell phone, though. Now it makes me wonder how many times she drove by without my noticing it. She isolated me from my friends and family. After we got married, she would refuse to visit with my parents, saying that my mom was too controlling and my dad was too antisocial. She would demand that I not hang out with my friends, mostly because they were morally repugnant or a bad influence. She even accused me of cheating on her a few times, even though we spent nearly every day together, and she always insisted in knowing where I was and whom I was with. Now that I've read other people's stories on Reddit, it makes me wonder if she was cheating and using the accusations to assuage her own guilt. For about 2 years of the 4-year marriage, she did not work and had a lot of free time, but I can't say that for certain. After we separated, I went to counseling, and they talked a lot about how her behavior was typical of an abuser, isolation, blaming the victim, etc. I'm almost 3 years past the initial separation, and I'm still really messed up and still don't really know how to deal with it. Unfortunately, the signs weren't clear for me until after we got married. He was fucking Prince Charming before then. After we got married, he banned me from speaking to certain guy friends because he felt they didn't have the right intentions, because I'm the kind of gal who can be tricked into sleeping with anyone apparently. Then he started controlling what I wore, what I listened to music wise, where I was allowed to go, etc. Then he lost his job 6 months in, and shit got worse. We moved back in with my mom. He refused to get a job. Every time I'd ask him if he looked, he would freak out. I was working 40+ hours a week, still cooking and cleaning, and we were living with my mom. He stopped even sleeping in the same bed as me and would play video games all night. He eventually moved his best friend in, who got kicked out of his house, who also refused to get a job. So I had 2 unemployed men to take care of. About a year into our marriage, 6 months into him being jobless, I tried standing up for myself. I wanted to go see one of my friends, one of the ones who I was banned from speaking to help him fix his car, and he freaked out. I basically told him I didn't care, he needed to trust me, and I was going. He started texting his friends so they would come and jump the guy with him. I knew what he was doing, and I asked to see his phone, and that's the first time he threw me across the room. I still went to help my friend with his car. Over the next few weeks he got increasingly more violent, choke slamming me, throwing me around. Since I stopped doing what he said, I finally said I don't know if I can do this anymore. He slammed me up against a wall and asked what I said our marriage, and he flipped out. Me and my little sister, who was pregnant at the time, and the dog hid in my car, locked, as he left while throwing things at my car. The split up lasted maybe a month, all the while I got death threats from him and his family members, harassing texts from him and his friends, and when he finally begged for me to let him back into my life, I complied because I was so afraid. He also promised he'd find a job, he'd take care of me, and he'd change. That change lasted maybe another 2 months, and things went back to normal. He constantly reminded me this time that if I ever left again he'd kill me. If I stood up to him in the slightest, he would scream at me, throw me around, choke slam me to the ground, his personal favorite, and I kept working, making all the money, while he didn't have a job, buying his cigarettes, and fucking Red Bull 3 times a day and his beer for him and his friends, and whatever else he wanted, because if I didn't, who knows. I was terrified. I was considering suicide. I started medication. I was having panic attacks constantly. He started telling me that he never wanted to have kids with me, which he knew when we got married was something I've always wanted. I had a sneaky suspicion he was cheating on me, but I never confronted him, just stopped sleeping with him for my safety, which further proved my suspicions, because he didn't care. He broke me to the point where I was crying every day. I couldn't smile, and I wasn't an empty shell to be around. We weren't sleeping together. We never went anywhere. He would get mad if I said thank you to a waiter at a restaurant, so what was the point? We were almost dead broke from him wanting to buy things out of our means, and with him not working, he started hanging out at his friends' houses more, and one day he told me he was going to one of their houses and he'd see me later. This was at about noon on a Thursday. I stayed home because I knew I shouldn't go anywhere, nor did I want to. I fell asleep on the couch waiting up for him. I woke up at 2:30 in the morning and called him to see where he was. He freaked out saying I was being too needy, and I said, well, you know it's 2:30 AM on a weekday. Most husbands would be home right now. He said I was being a bitch and he wouldn't come home, so in a moment of rare bravery, I asked him if he wanted his things on the front porch. No answer. So I said, okay, do you want to be married anymore? And he just said no. So I said, okay, why? His response, you ask too much of me. I said okay, and hung up the phone. I will never forget that cry. It was the feeling of being cheated, the realization that I had wasted 2 years of my life, that I had lost all my freedoms, and in one fell swoop, I gained them back. It was a cry of utter relief. I never thought I would ever be free. I thought I was going to die that way. It was the happiest, loudest, most emotional cry of my life. I could never explain that moment, and I will never forget that feeling. I celebrated the next day by packing everything he owned and putting it on the front porch. I even gave him my wedding and engagement rings. I didn't want the money from them. My friends literally told me they could see the weight lifted off my shoulders in one day and that I was back. 2 years later, I'm happily living with my boyfriend, who treats me amazingly. Treats me how I've always wanted to be treated, not as a queen, not someone who is beneath him, but as his equal. I take care of him, he takes care of me, and we are having our first child in August, and I could not be happier, and I don't plan on getting married again for a long time. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.